The roar of Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engines tore through the frozen air at 25,000 feet. It was February 10, 1944, and the sky over Germany was painted a metallic blue that seemed deceptively peaceful. But nothing up here was peaceful. Major James Howard tightened his grip on the controls of his P-51 Mustang, feeling the familiar vibration of the fighter through his leather gloves. Behind him, in tight formation, flew the other 15 pilots of the 354th Fighter Group. They were the escort, the protection, the only thing between 200 B-17 Flying Fortress bombers and death. Miles below, the German landscape stretched out like a frozen map. Black forests, white snow-covered fields, gray cities. And somewhere in that hostile territory, hundreds of Luftwaffe fighters waited for their opportunity. The mission was simple on paper: escort the heavy bombers to Ostersleben, an industrial city in the heart of Nazi Germany. Let them do their work. Bring them back. But nothing was simple when you flew over the Reich. Howard checked his instruments. Fuel, sufficient, but not spare. Ammunition, 6.50 caliber machine guns, all loaded. He had 2,400 rounds. Each one could make the difference between living and dying. Over the radio, the calm voice of the bomber formation commander crackled, "Bandits, 11 o'clock high. Multiple contacts." Howard's stomach tightened. He scanned the horizon and saw them, black dots materializing against the blue. First 3, then 6, then more than he could count. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, Focke-Wulf FW-190s, maybe 30, maybe 40, diving at high speed, ready to massacre the slow, vulnerable bombers. "Stay tight, boys," Howard transmitted to his flight. His voice was steady, but inside the cramped cockpit, his heart pounded like a war drum. And then it happened. A group of P-51s ahead broke formation prematurely, chasing a group of German fighters that deliberately pulled away, a classic decoy. Howard watched with growing horror as more and more of his own fighters dispersed, taking the bait, leaving the bombers exposed. Within seconds, the escort formation disintegrated. Howard looked left, looked right, made a quick count over the radio. Silence. More silence. He was alone. A single P-51 Mustang against what seemed like the entire Luftwaffe. And behind him, 200 B-17 bombers full of crews, 2,000 men, were counting on him to survive. The sky was about to catch fire. Howard had no time to think, only to act. 3 Focke-Wulf FW-190s dove in attack formation against the left flank of the B-17s. He pushed the stick forward, feeling the G-force pressing his body into the seat as the Mustang plummeted in an intercept dive. Speed increased vertiginously. 300 miles per hour. 350. 400. Air whistled against the canopy. His vision began to narrow at the edges, but he kept his focus locked on the German fighters. At 800 yards, still out of range. At 600, it was becoming possible. At 400, he squeezed the trigger. All 6.50 caliber machine guns exploded to life. Red tracers cut across the sky, converging on the lead FW-190. Howard saw pieces of metal tear away from the German fighter's left wing. Black smoke poured from the engine. The German pilot tried to evade, but it was too late. The Focke-Wulf rolled violently and entered a deadly spin, falling like a stone toward the frozen earth 6 miles below. "One down," Howard murmured to himself. But there was no time to celebrate. 2 Bf-109s came from the right, at high speed. Howard yanked the stick hard, feeling the Mustang groan under the stress of a high G turn. His vision darkened momentarily, gray out, but he maintained pressure. The P-51 responded like a racehorse, turning in a tight arc that would have torn apart any less agile fighter. Howard found himself behind one of the Messerschmitts. Another burst of fire. This time, shorter, more controlled. Bullets ripped through the 109's fuselage, tearing through the cockpit. The German fighter shuddered, then slowly rolled and began to descend, out of control. But the second 109 was on his tail. Howard heard the unmistakable sound of bullets passing close, a sharp crack, like twigs snapping. Holes appeared in his right wing. He threw the Mustang into a violent barrel roll, then dove sharply. The German pilot, clearly experienced, followed every move. Howard could see him in the rearview mirror, a sinister shadow glued to his tail, waiting for the right moment for the kill shot. Think. Howard chopped the throttle abruptly and extended the flaps, a desperate maneuver almost nobody attempted in combat. The Mustang decelerated as if it had hit an invisible wall. The Messerschmitt, at 400 miles per hour, shot past him like a bullet. Howard didn't waste the opportunity. He retracted the flaps, throttle to the firewall, and was back on the German's tail in 3 seconds. A quick burst. The 109 exploded in an orange and black fireball. 3 down. But as he turned back toward the bombers, Howard saw the real situation. It wasn't just one group of fighters. It was a massive wave, at least 30 FW-190s and BF-109s, preparing for multiple coordinated attacks against the B-17 formation. And he was the only thing between them and the bombers. Howard took a deep breath. His fuel tank was dropping. His ammunition was half gone. His hands trembled slightly from adrenaline and exhaustion. But he couldn't stop. He pushed the throttle to the firewall and dove back into hell. What happened in the next 30 minutes would defy all tactical logic and statistical probability. Howard attacked. Not defensively. Not cautiously. He attacked like a maddened predator, throwing his single P-51 Mustang against entire formations of enemy fighters with suicidal aggression that the Germans simply didn't expect. He fell upon a formation of 4 FW-190s lining up for a frontal attack on the B-17s. The Germans flew in line, focused on their slow, fat targets ahead. They didn't expect a single American fighter coming directly at them. Howard opened fire at 1,000 yards, too far for real accuracy, but close enough for psychological effect. Red tracers filled the sky between them. The German leader broke formation abruptly, forcing the others to scatter. The attack was aborted. But Howard knew this was just the beginning. The Luftwaffe wasn't going to give up. Not with such a juicy target. 200 B-17s represented the destruction of factories, oil refineries, the very machinery of the Third Reich. Every German pilot in the sky had orders. Stop them at all costs. Howard rolled violently left, where another group of 3 Bf-109s made a high-speed dive. He couldn't reach them before they hit the bombers, but he could force them to decide, complete the attack or deal with him. He chose for them. A long burst from his .50 calibers cut the space ahead of the Messerschmitts. One of them, the wingman, panicked and peeled away. The other 2 continued, but now with their attention divided. A fatal mistake. Howard dove below their line of fire, then pulled into a brutal vertical climb that pressed his body into the seat with 6 gs of force. Blood drained from his head. Tunnel vision. But he maintained control. At the top of the climb, he rolled inverted and came down directly on the tail of the last 109. His fingers squeezed the trigger. 3 seconds of concentrated fire. 50 rounds tore through the Messerschmitt's thin aluminum skin. Coolant sprayed. The engine seized. The fighter began to burn, leaving a trail of black smoke as it desperately tried to escape. Howard didn't watch it fall. He was already scanning for the next threat. And there it was. A pair of FW-190s had broken through on the opposite flank, coming at the bombers from below, the most vulnerable angle. The belly turrets of the B-17s were already firing, tracers arcing down, but the German pilots were good. They weaved through the defensive fire like dancers, closing the distance. Howard banked hard right, his wings vertical to the earth. The G-forces crushed him into his seat. His vision grayed at the edges. The Mustang groaned, stressed beyond its design limits. But it held. He came at the FW-190s from an angle they never saw coming, perpendicular to their attack run. At 500 yards, he opened fire. The lead German fighter exploded, disintegrating in mid-air. Pieces of wing, fuselage, and pilot scattered across the sky. The second 190 aborted immediately, diving away at full throttle. Inside the lead B-17, the pilot keyed his radio. "That Mustang just saved our ass. Who the hell is flying that thing?" But Howard's Mustang was taking punishment. More holes appeared in the fuselage. Zip, 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 like an invisible sewing machine stitching death across the aluminum skin. One of the auxiliary tanks was hit, precious fuel streaming out into the freezing air. The instrument panel cracked as a 20mm shell fragment punched through the cowling and ricocheted inside the cockpit. Howard felt a sharp pain in his left leg. Blood seeped through his flight suit. He'd been hit by shrapnel, but there was no time to assess the damage. No time to think about it. 3 more 109s were diving on the bombers from high altitude. Classic Luftwaffe tactics. Build speed in the dive, make one devastating pass, then zoom climb away before the escorts could react. Except Howard was already reacting. He pulled the Mustang into a climbing turn that should have been impossible at this altitude and speed. The airframe shuddered. The stall warning horn blared. But the P-51, that beautiful, deadly machine, clawed its way up. Howard intercepted the diving Messerschmitts head-on. It was insane. A head-on pass meant both fighters were closing at a combined speed of over 700 miles per hour. The margin for error was measured in fractions of a second. Miss, and the German fighters would tear into the bombers. Hit, and, well, you had to hit first. Howard's thumbs pressed down on the firing buttons. All 6.50 calibers erupted. The combined recoil slowed the Mustang perceptibly. Spent shell casings poured from the gun ports, glittering in the sunlight like brass confetti. The lead 109 flew directly into the stream of fire. Its canopy shattered. The propeller disintegrated. The fighter tumbled out of control, the pilot dead at the stick. But the other 2 109s fired back. Howard felt the impacts, heavy, solid thumps as cannon shells hit his aircraft. The right aileron was shredded. Control became sluggish, mushy. He had to fight the stick just to keep the Mustang level. The 2 surviving 109s flashed past him, missing by mere feet. Howard immediately reversed, trying to follow, but the damaged controls made it nearly impossible. The Mustang wallowed through the air like a wounded bird. He gritted his teeth and forced the aircraft around. Every movement was a battle against aerodynamics that no longer worked in his favor. But he got the nose around just enough. One of the 109s was there, in his gun sight, for just a fraction of a second. Howard fired. A short burst, all he could manage with his remaining ammunition. It was enough. The Messerschmitt's engine erupted in flames. The pilot bailed out, his parachute blossoming white against the blue sky. But the ammunition counter was flashing red now. Howard glanced at it, 347 rounds remaining, out of 2,400. And he was burning through them at 800 rounds per minute when he fired. Less than 30 seconds of firing time left. And the sky was still full of German fighters. From below, a fresh wave of attackers appeared. Howard counted 10 FW-190s, climbing in a coordinated formation. These weren't the scattered attacks anymore. This was organized. Deadly. The German squadron leader had clearly identified the problem. One crazy American was disrupting every attack run. Solution: eliminate him first, then the bombers would be defenseless. 10 against 1. Howard's fuel gauge showed critical. His ammunition was nearly gone. His aircraft was shot to pieces, barely controllable. His leg throbbed with pain. Blood had pooled in his boot. Any rational person would break off. Dive away. Try to make it home. Howard pushed the throttle forward and climbed to meet them. The lead FW-190 opened fire first, long-range, probing. Tracers arced past Howard's canopy, some so close he could feel their heat. He jinked left, then right, making himself a difficult target while closing the distance. At 600 yards, he fired back. A 2-second burst. The lead 190 pulled up sharply, breaking formation. The others scattered slightly, their neat tactical formation disrupted by the sheer audacity of a lone fighter charging straight at them. It bought seconds. Precious seconds. Howard dove through the gap in their formation, rolled inverted, and pulled through. He came up behind the trailing 190 and fired again. 1 second. That's all the trigger time he allowed himself. The German fighter's left wing root erupted in flames. It rolled away, trailing smoke. But now they had him surrounded. 2 190s above. 3 behind. 2 more coming from the left. Howard was in the middle of a death trap, and the Germans knew it. The radio in the bomber formation crackled with urgent voices. Mustang leader, break off. You're surrounded. Get out of there. Jesus, he's still fighting. Howard didn't respond. Couldn't respond. Every fiber of his being was focused on survival and protecting those bombers. He threw the Mustang into a series of violent maneuvers, barrel rolls, split S-turns, snap rolls, anything to keep the Germans from getting a solid firing solution. A 190 flashed in front of him. Howard fired. 3 rounds. That's all he had time for. They missed. Another 190 on his tail. He felt impacts, more hits. The instrument panel sparked. Oil pressure dropping. Engine temperature rising. He pulled into a vertical climb, trading precious speed for altitude. The 190 behind him followed, but the Focke-Wulf couldn't match the Mustang's climb rate. Howard got separation, just enough. At the top of the climb, he snap-rolled and dove back down. The 190 that had been chasing him was now below him, vulnerable. Howard lined up, squeezed the trigger. Click. Nothing. He was out of ammunition. Completely dry. But he didn't pull away. Instead, Howard dove directly at the German fighter as if he was still firing. The German pilot, not knowing Howard's guns were empty, panicked and broke left. Howard followed him down in a screaming dive, right on his tail, his empty guns pointed at the German like a bluff in a poker game where the stakes were life and death. The FW-190 pilot, convinced he was about to be shot down, dove for the deck and ran for home. 7 left. But they were regrouping, and Howard had nothing left to shoot with. Then, from the right, 2 more 190s came at him in a coordinated attack. Howard turned into them, again, as if to fire. They scattered. It was working. The psychological warfare. The Germans had been fighting this lone maniac for 25 minutes. He'd shot down at least 6 of their comrades, maybe more. He'd disrupted every attack. He'd shown no fear, no hesitation. In their minds, he was superhuman. They didn't know his guns were empty. Howard continued to attack, diving at German formations, forcing them to break off their runs on the bombers. He was flying a bluff at 25,000 feet, betting his life that the Germans wouldn't call it. Inside the cockpit, his vision swam. Blood loss. Exhaustion. The adrenaline that had kept him sharp was fading. His hands shook on the stick. The pain in his leg was excruciating. The engine was dying. Oil streamed from a punctured line, coating the windscreen. The manifold pressure gauge showed red. Temperature was through the roof. The Mustang's Merlin engine, that beautiful Rolls-Royce power plant, was being cooked alive. But still, Howard stayed. The German fighters began to pull back. They'd been at combat power for 30 minutes. Their own fuel was running low. And that insane American was still between them and the bombers. One by one, they disengaged. The sky began to clear. Howard made one more pass around the bomber formation, checking for stragglers or wounded B-17s falling behind. All present. All accounted for. Not one bomber lost. Only then did he allow himself to acknowledge the reality of his situation. His aircraft was dying. Fuel critical. No ammunition. Engine failing. Controls barely responsive. Blood loss making him dizzy. And he was 200 miles deep in enemy territory. The Merlin engine coughed once. Twice. A shudder ran through the entire airframe. Howard's eyes snapped to the instrument panel. What was left of it? Oil pressure, 0. Coolant temperature, off the scale. The engine was seconds away from seizing completely. He had to make a decision. No. Bail out over Germany and spend the rest of the war in a POW camp. Or try to nurse this dying fighter back to England and probably die in the attempt. Howard looked down at the landscape below. Occupied France. Somewhere down there, resistance fighters operated. Maybe he could evade. Maybe. Then his radio crackled to life. Mustang leader, this is Big Friend Actual. It was the voice of Colonel Robert Johnson, commanding the bomber formation. What's your status? Howard pressed the transmit button. His voice was hoarse, strained. Big Friend, I'm ammunition expended. Fuel critical. Engine failing. Aircraft extensively damaged. He paused, taking a breath that hurt. I don't think I'm making it home. Silence on the radio for a moment. Then, Major Howard, I need you to listen very carefully. You're going to make it home. We're going to help you. Can you still maintain altitude? Howard checked. The Mustang was slowly descending, even with the throttle forward. The engine just didn't have the power anymore. Negative, Big Friend. Losing altitude gradually. Understood. We're reducing speed and altitude. Get in our formation. Fly in our slipstream. We'll drag you home. What Johnson was proposing was unprecedented. The B-17 formation would have to slow down, drop altitude, burn extra fuel, all of it making them more vulnerable to any remaining German fighters or flak batteries. It meant risking 200 bombers and 2,000 men to save one fighter pilot. Big Friend, I can't ask you to. You're not asking, Major. We're telling. You kept every one of my birds in the sky. We're damn well going to return the favor. Now get your ass in formation. Howard felt something break inside him, not physically, but emotionally. The wall he'd built to keep fighting, to stay focused, to ignore the pain and fear. Tears blurred his vision. He blinked them away angrily. Roger, Big Friend. Coming in. He eased the crippled Mustang into position just behind and below the lead bomber formation. The B-17s had reduced speed to barely above stall speed, around 150 miles per hour. It was painfully slow for the heavy bombers, but it was the only way Howard's damaged fighter could keep up. The effect was immediate. Flying in the slipstream of the massive bombers reduced the drag on his Mustang significantly. The dying engine didn't have to work as hard. His rate of descent slowed, then stopped. But they weren't out of danger yet. They were flying low and slow over occupied France. Perfect targets for German flak batteries and any remaining fighters in the area. As if on cue, black puffs of smoke began appearing around the formation. Anti-aircraft fire. The Germans on the ground had spotted them. Whumph, whumph, whumph. The explosions were close enough that Howard could hear them over the dying engine. Shrapnel rattled against his aircraft like deadly hail. The B-17s around him tightened formation, their gunners scanning the sky for threats. Inside the lead bomber, Colonel Johnson keyed the radio to his entire formation. All aircraft maintain speed and altitude. Evasive maneuvers are not authorized. We have a wounded fighter pilot who needs our slipstream to make it home. We're not leaving him behind. 2,000 men, in that moment, silently agreed. Not one bomber broke formation. Not one tried to climb away from the flak. They flew steady and true, absorbing the punishment, protecting the man who had protected them. A flak burst exploded directly beneath one of the B-17s. Howard watched in horror as the massive bomber shuddered, a section of its left wing torn away. But the pilot held formation. The damaged bomber kept flying, kept its position. "Rider 37, you're hit," Johnson called. "Status?" "We're okay, actual," came the reply, the pilot's voice tight with stress. "Number 2 engines out, but we can maintain. Not leaving the major." Howard's throat constricted. These men, these incredible men, were risking everything for him. The minutes crawled by. Each one felt like an hour. The engine temperature gauge was buried in the red zone. Howard could smell burning oil, hot metal, things breaking inside the Merlin engine that should never break. The coastline appeared ahead. The English Channel. 15 miles of cold, dark water between occupied France and England. "Almost there, Major." Johnson's voice was calm, encouraging. "Another 10 minutes." But Howard's engine had other ideas. With a grinding screech of metal on metal, the Merlin engine seized. The propeller stopped dead. Suddenly, the cockpit was eerily quiet, just the whistle of wind over the bullet holes and the faint creaking of stressed airframe. The Mustang became a glider. A very bad glider, with one shredded aileron and a damaged rudder. Howard nosed down to maintain airspeed. Without the slipstream from the bombers, he'd sink like a stone. "Big friend, I've lost the engine." "Going down." "Negative, Major. Stay in our slipstream. We're over the channel. You can glide to England from here." Howard did the math in his head. 5 miles of altitude. Maybe 10 miles to the English coast. At best glide ratio, assuming his damaged aircraft could even achieve best glide ratio, he might make it to the beach. Might. The B-17 formation stayed with him, matching his descent rate. They were going down together, abandoning their safe altitude, just to give him a better chance. "All aircraft, this is actual," Johnson transmitted. "Air-Sea Rescue has been notified. Crash boats are standing by. If the Major has to ditch, we'll circle until pickup." But Howard had no intention of ditching. Not after everything. Not after these men had risked so much for him. He focused every bit of skill, every hour of flight training, every ounce of determination into flying that broken machine. He felt every current of air, every slight change in pressure. The Mustang wanted to roll left, the damaged aileron. He compensated with rudder. The nose wanted to drop, the weight distribution was off, probably battle damage he couldn't see. He trimmed as best he could with the shot-up trim tabs. The English coast grew larger. White cliffs. Green fields. Home. But he was too low. The glide ratio wasn't enough. He was going to hit the water short of land. Unless... Howard spotted a thermal rising from the dark water of the channel, probably from a warm current. It was a gamble. Turn toward it, catch the rising air, maybe gain a few hundred precious feet. He banked gently left, feeling the Mustang shudder as the damaged controls protested. The nose dropped. Airspeed increased. For a moment, he thought he'd made a fatal mistake. Then he felt it. The subtle lift. The aircraft rose slightly, carried by the column of warm air. He'd gained 200 feet. It was enough. The Mustang crossed the coastline at 800 feet, slowly descending. Howard scanned ahead for any flat area. A beach. A field. Anything. There, a grass airfield. Probably an auxiliary field for damaged bombers. The runway looked short, but it was his only option. Big friend, I'm putting her down at what looks like a coastal auxiliary field. Thank you for everything. You did good, son. Real good. See you on the ground. Howard lined up on final approach. No engine. No hydraulics for the landing gear. He'd have to crank them down manually. No flaps. Just a wounded glider coming in too fast with no margin for error. He reached down and cranked the emergency gear extension. The right main came down. The left main came down. The nose gear stuck. Of course it was. 2 out of 3 would have to do. The field rushed up at him. Howard held the nose high, bleeding off speed, fighting every instability in the damaged airframe. The ground was 50 feet away. 30. 20. The main gear touched grass. The Mustang bounced once, settling back down. Howard held the stick back, keeping the nose up as long as possible. The aircraft slowed. Then the nose dropped. The cowling hit the grass with a grinding shriek. The Mustang pitched forward violently. Howard was thrown against his harness hard enough to crack ribs. The world spun. Metal screamed. Dirt flew. Then silence. Howard sat in the cockpit, breathing hard, unable to quite believe he was alive. On the ground. In England. He tried to move and gasped at the pain. Broken ribs for sure. The leg wound was bleeding again. His head swam. He heard shouting. Running feet. Hands reaching into the cockpit, helping him out. An ambulance siren in the distance. As they laid him on a stretcher, Howard looked up. The sky was full of B-17s, circling overhead. 200 of them. Every single one he'd protected, waggling their wings in salute. One pilot, looking down from his bomber, keyed his radio for all to hear. That, gentlemen, is what a hero looks like. 3 weeks later. The hospital room was too white, too clean, too quiet after the chaos of combat. Major James Howard sat in bed, his left leg in a cast, ribs wrapped tight, but alive. The door opened. A general walked in, 2 stars on his shoulders. Howard tried to sit up straighter, but grimaced at the pain. "At ease, Major," General James Doolittle said, a slight smile on his weathered face. "I'm not here for protocol." Doolittle pulled up a chair and sat down. "Do you know what you did up there?" Howard shrugged, immediately regretting it as pain shot through his ribs. "I did my job, sir. Protected the bombers." "Your job," Doolittle repeated, shaking his head. "Major, I've flown combat missions. I've seen brave men do incredible things. But what you did—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "In 30 minutes of continuous combat, you single-handedly engaged and disrupted approximately 30 German fighters. You shot down at least 6, possibly as many as 10. You prevented every single attack on that bomber formation. 200 bombers. 2,000 men. All came home because of you. Sir, I'm not finished." Doolittle's voice was firm but not unkind. "Your aircraft took over 50 hits. Your ammunition was expended. Your fuel was gone. Your engine was failing. You were wounded. And you still stayed. You even continued to attack German fighters with empty guns." He stood, reaching into his jacket. "Major James H. Howard, by order of the President of the United States, you are awarded the Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of your life above and beyond the call of duty." Doolittle placed the light blue ribbon with its distinctive star around Howard's neck. You're the only fighter pilot in the European theater to receive this honor, Major. And from everything I've heard, it's well deserved." Howard looked down at the medal, feeling its weight. It wasn't heavy, just a few ounces of metal and ribbon. But it represented something much heavier, the responsibility he'd felt for 2,000 lives, the impossible choice to stay when every instinct screamed to run, the pain and fear and determination of those 30 minutes over Germany. "Sir," Howard said quietly, "I was just doing what anyone would do. Those men in the bombers, they were counting on me. I couldn't let them down." Doolittle smiled sadly. "That's where you're wrong, Major. Most men would have broken off. Most men would have tried to save themselves. The fact that you don't understand how extraordinary your actions were, well, that's what makes them truly extraordinary." The reunion, 1984, 40 years later. The hotel conference room was full of old men. Gray hair, stooped shoulders, weathered faces lined with age and experience. But their eyes still held the sharpness of the young men they'd once been. It was the annual reunion of the 401st Bomb Group. Men who had flown B-17s over Germany. Men who had seen the worst of the air war and somehow survived to tell about it. James Howard, now in his 70s, sat quietly in a corner, a cane resting against his chair. He didn't like being the center of attention. Never had. Even after the Medal of Honor, the news articles, the fame, he'd always tried to deflect, to minimize what he'd done. But they found him anyway. First one, then another, then a dozen old bomber crewmen made their way to him. They shook his hand, some with tears in their eyes. "I was in Rider 37, one man said, his voice thick with emotion. "We were the bomber that took flak damage when you were gliding home. I watched you from the waist gun position. You were so low, I thought for sure you were going into the channel. But you made it. You made it, and so did we." Another stepped forward. "I was a navigator on that mission. I was plotting our course when the fighters came in. I saw you on one of them, this single Mustang taking on the whole goddamn Luftwaffe. I told my pilot, that man's going to die trying to save us. But you didn't die. You saved us all." A third man, tears streaming down his face, gripped Howard's hand with both of his. "My son got to grow up because of you. My grandchildren exist because you didn't quit. How do I thank you for that? How do I thank you for my whole life?"